Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily. Today we're talking about heat stress. In the UK, it's been unseasonably warm or hot for the time of year, and it's definitely been unseasonably dry. There's been no rain. Maybe where you are, it's also unseasonably warm, and as we get into summer, that's going to be even more of the case. I always say, the best time to start hydroponics is in the winter because it's a lot easier. All of your problems get a lot more severe in the summer and it becomes a lot harder to control the environment. And heat stress is the main cause of this. And obviously, other issues around just going on holiday. Lots of people go on holiday during the summer, so that can mean that your grow room gets left unattended. However, it's the heat that we're going to concentrate on today. So most plants like a temperature between 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in American, probably 80 to 90 Fahrenheit, something like that. Please get in touch. If you go above 30 degrees Celsius, most crops will suffer. There will be some that like to grow in very, very hot conditions, like the C4 plants or cacti, things like sugarcane and things like that. But most plants will start to suffer. And the symptoms you'll get are the flowers and the fruits will suffer first. You'll get scorch, and you might get flower drop and fruit drop. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you're not going to get much damage until you get to about 5 degrees Celsius for most plants. So the upper limit for plants is quite low. Then you've got to remember that your plant may be hotter than the air temperature. So if your plants are slightly running a slight water deficit in the soil, then the stomata will be closed. And that means that the leaf temperature could be 5 degrees Celsius warmer. So suddenly 30 becomes 35 or 35 becomes 40, and your plant will start to cook. It'll start to scorch. Photosynthesis will stop. It will become a lot less efficient. Flowers and fruits will become malformed and may drop. But scorch is a big danger there. So the first tip is always make sure your plants are extremely well watered. I've talked in the past about how there can be benefits from running a deficit irrigation system, but if it's really high temperatures, you want to avoid that. So make sure that you get ample water throughout the day as well. So if you water once a day and you're in a greenhouse with really low humidity and high airflow, they're going to dry out during the day significantly. So maybe look at installing a irrigation system, and this is Hydroponics Daily, so that's for cocoa growers and soil growers. For hydroponic growers, you're in an advantage because you can supply fertigation constantly with an FT system, or with flood and drain. You could up the number of floods. DWC, again, the thing you need to be careful of is your reservoir going to be running dry. And as the plants suck up lots of water, is the EC level going to rise significantly during the day? Obviously, you can top it up when you get in later in the day, or you get round to that task. But just make sure your EC levels don't go too high as the plants suck up so much water in your hydroponic systems. Other things you can do, if it's going to be a really, really hot day and it's going to be the exception for the norm, you could lower the light intensity if you're growing indoors. Most lights now, hydroponic lights, are dimmable, so you might want to lower it for a day or two. Yes, you might not get the same amount of light, but photosynthesis won't suffer because it's such high temperatures. If you had those high light levels, they would just be doing something called photorespiration and damaging plants. So lower your light intensity. If you're growing auto-flowering or non-photoperiodic varieties and strains, you can lower the photoperiod so the lights aren't on during the day, during the peaks of high temperatures. That's not going to affect yield dramatically. If you are growing photoperiodic plants, that's less of an option, but just look at the minimal, what we call the critical day length for that plant, for that variety. If it's, say, 16 hours and you're running at 22 hours day lengths, you could drop that by 4 hours per day, and there wouldn't be an issue. Now, obviously, don't drop that 4 in the middle of the day, but either side, if it's still really, really hot, that's an option. Now, 2 really key things to coping with heat stress. The first one is CO2 enrichment. Now, obviously, don't use a heater, but a burner type CO2 enrichment, because that's going to be adding temperature. But a canister type CO2 would be ideal in this situation. Enriching CO2 really helps with plants cope with heat stress. And one of the issues with canisters can be that they ice up, they freeze up if you use too much of it too quickly. But in, above 30 degrees Celsius, that's not going to be a problem unless you're using serious amounts of CO2. Now, one of the other ways you can cope with high temperatures is to increase your airflow, bump up the speed of your inlet filter and your outlet filter, move the air around the grow room faster with your circulatory fan. However, if you're enriching with CO2, you might want to experiment with that, because you don't want to just be enriching with CO2 and then sucking all that air out straight away. You want to get bang for your buck with that CO2. So there's a game to be played there. Another way you can help the plants cope with heat stress is to increase the humidity. So dial the humidity up to the upper limit that is safe for your crop. Don't be going too high, because high temperatures and high humidities can promote powdery mildew growth. And so, but if you're at the lower end of your humidity range for that crop at that temperature, then look at increasing the humidity. Consult a VPD chart, work out what the prevailing temperature is going to be in your grow room, and then take it to the top of the humidity that keeps you in the green zone. Most VPD charts, the central zone, the central curve is the green zone. So have a look at that. As I said, increase air movement. Look at installing an air conditioning unit to lower the temperature. If it's your first time grow, don't go out and buy an air conditioning unit. But if you're a medium-sized grower, or you've thought about air conditioning in the past, and you think that you might lose your crop, or it would significantly affect your crop, then air conditioning could be an option. Especially where you're thinking about, like, one of the problems with high temperatures is your terpenes can volatilize off. They can evaporate off the plants. You can lose, if you're growing a terpene-based, like a scent crop, a flower crop that needs scent, then that can be an issue. Things like lots of plants produce terpenes and isoprenes, and they, in really high temperatures, photosynthesis, rather than producing sugars, produces gases that volatilize off, and you lose carbon into the air. And that's one of the components of smog and also global warming is these isoprene emissions. So high temperatures, you can lose crop quality if you're not careful. So an air conditioning unit might be, for high value crops, air conditioning unit might be something to look at. I said increase your outflow and your inflow rates. Make sure if you've got an inflow filter that it can cope with that extra pressure that it'll be under. It doesn't just pop off the filter. That would be the worst case scenario, because you come back in and you find that your grow room has been sucked in a load of fungus gnats and aphids and whiteflies that will be flying around in the high temperatures, because they love those sorts of conditions. And again, your outflow filter, make sure your outflow filter can cope with that airflow if you're trying to scrub the air going out. There are a number of biostimulants that you'll see sold that claim to help plants cope with heat stress, and there's some that claim to help plants deal with cold stress. More often than not, these are biostimulants sold under the guise of being a fancy product, more fancy than they are. They might be a seaweed extract or a glycine betaine or something like this. Some sort of biostimulant that has, one of the benefits is that it helps plants cope with heat stress. But unless you're in America, they might not say what's in the product on the label. Certainly won't say it in the safety data sheet unless it's hazardous. So be careful you're not overpaying for what is a basic biostimulant with that. If you're interested and you want to know more about those sorts of products, and you want your advice on, say, a product, feel free to email me and I will cast my eye over the product and say whether it's a good investment or not, because then we can look at it and see what it's potentially made of. And it might be really good value for money. I don't know. Some of them are. Obviously, certain plants are going to like high temperatures, but you can't really choose certain varieties based on, a weather forecast. Most weather forecasts only go for 10 days. So you can't really, that's the problem with a lot of environmental stresses. You can get varieties that cope well with flooding or drought or heat stress or cold stress or other things like that, high wind, even like lodging and things like this, but you don't know the weather you're going to get until you get it. So that's why plant breeders don't really breed for environmental stress resistance. So that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. If you're growing in NFT systems, make sure your nutrient tank doesn't run out. DWC, again, DWC and ebb and flood, make sure that your tank doesn't go to the point where your roots aren't being submerged to the same point every day, because you get really bad stress levels from those roots that aren't submerged. So make sure you can top that level up. Some people have automatic pumps that work from the mains water that will top a tank up. It'd be going to be a fairly big grower to do that. And what other systems could we look at? We talked about cocoa and how you might want to water the source. If you're growing in cocoa and you're hand watering, you might want to put some water in the sources below the plants, bottom feeding, as it were. I tend to not recommend that as a daily routine because you get root rot at the bottom. However, if it's on periods of extremely high temperatures, then you could do that. Obviously, that's how an autopot or a passive system works, is it feeds from the bottom. So autopots would be fine under high temperatures, just making sure that the tank isn't getting too dry in a 24-hour period or however many days you leave it before filling it up. And make sure you really look, in all systems, make sure you look at the EC level, because as it's sucking all that water out of the fertigation system, your EC levels can be getting really high. Okay? Another key issue during high temperatures is the fertigation tank. When it gets hot, it will start to encourage microbial growth. And so it might get a bit stinky during high temperatures. Certain nutrients might start to interact at high temperatures as well. So just keep an eye on your tank. Make sure that you've not got any biofilms developing. You haven't got any nutrients locking out. You might want to add a bit of peroxide just to keep the bacterial levels low. And you can buy cooling systems for fertigation tanks. And the added advantage of that is that when that fertigation solution goes through to your plants, then it keeps the root system cool as well. Okay? If you're running a system with lights indoors, you could also look at putting the lights on during the night and then having the lights off during the day. In many countries, you can also save on electricity costs because electricity is cheaper during the night as well. So that's something to look at. That helps with high temperatures. It also helps in the winter because if you're growing in say, like a shed-based system or in a conservatory, your grow room's there, then the low temperatures at the night, if you have the lights on during the night, that helps just take off those really low minimums. And so you get much more of an even temperature. Obviously, it's not very conducive to actually you going out there and measuring and looking at your plants, because you have to be a night owl. You have to be on nights then, because unless you've got a green safe light, you can't really go in when the lights are off if it's photoperiodic. Okay, so it makes things more difficult to do that. So I appreciate that, but it might be a good option if you get really bad heat stress. So hopefully we don't get really extreme heat waves this year and everyone's crop looks amazing. If you think I've missed something about growing hydroponically in a what do you call it? A heat wave, that's the word, then let me know. If not, then give this podcast a like and share it with your friends and all the other gubbins that I tell you to do every week. Thank you very much for listening. Until tomorrow, that's been Hydroponics Daily.